The following story has been brought to you by StoriesToInspire.org.
Everyone's heard of Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, the Gadol Hadar. I was at Reb Shlomo Zalman's Levaya. At his Levaya, there were 600,000-700,000 people, every type of Yid, Chassidim, Svardim, Ashkenaz, Litvish. Everyone was there, religious, non-religious. Everyone realized the godless of Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who was larger than life in every single aspect of his anhaga. What most people are not aware of is, where did this start? At what point did Reb Shlomo Zalman all of a sudden start his track to godless, to this incredible Torah and Tzidkis? It actually started when he was a child, but most of the people are not familiar when. Just to understand when it started, Reb Shlomo Zalman grew up in a beautiful mishpacha. His father, Reb Chaim Leib, was a goy nadir, and sadly, they were so poor, incredibly impoverished, they didn't have what to eat. It got to a point where they mamish didn't have bread and they were starving. His father, Reb Chaim Leib, went out and he borrowed some money from a Karen, maybe from an individual. And it would be some money to tide the family over so they could buy bread so they shouldn't starve to death. The money quickly was depleted, and the people that they owed the money to came banging at the door. "Where's our money?" Reb Chaim Leib said, "I would love to give you. I don't have the money. I wasn't able to earn any money. What should I do?" He said, "It's not the end of the world. I'm sure you have something of value. Give it to us." So Reb Shlomo Zalman's mother goes and maybe she takes her wedding band and a few little trinkets and jewelry that maybe she got by Yerusha, and she piles it on the table. She says, "Here, take this." They looked at it. They said, "That's not going to cut it." She goes, "I'm sorry, we don't have anything else. Look at this. The house is bare. The cupboards are bare. We're aniyim merudim." One of the fellows says, "You do have something of value." And he points to the Svarim Shrank, to the shelves of the Svarim. He goes, "Svarim are not cheap." And he walks over to the Svarim Shrank and he begins to take Svarim off. And all of a sudden, in front of the whole mishpacha, there's a piercing shriek, and then a wail, and uncontrolled crying. It was Reb Shlomo Zalman's mother. She says, "You can't take my Chaim Leib Svarim. That's our life. Kihem Chayin. If you take the Svarim, life is not worth living." And she begins to beg and to plead and to cry. And little young Shlomo Zalman is standing there at the side. And he sees those tears of his mother, and he sees the agony, and he recognizes the preciousness of Torah, Torah spicha me'alfei zav v'chesef. And that opened his eyes, it opened his heart, it opened his neshama to start learning, to start dedicating himself to Avodas Hashem. And as they say, the rest is history. Those were the tears of his mother, the tears that ultimately turned into godless. That was the currency to have a son that changed the face of Klal Yisrael. Do you know that Rebbetzin Schlesinger, Rabbi Yaakov Schlesinger's wife, when she lived in Eretz Yisrael, she was a neighbor with the Rotbergs, Zalman Rotberg, incredible Talmid Chacham. And one day she lit neiros, and the husbands were at shul, and she was sitting, whatever she was doing, and all of a sudden she hears uncontrollable sobbing coming from next door from Rebbetzin Rotberg. And she panics and she knocks on the door, and there's no answer. She gets so nervous that she opens up the door and she comes in. And Rebbetzin Rotberg is sitting there next to the neiros, and she is crying, bechiyas shelsh, uncontrollable tears. She walks over. "Is everyone okay? Is everyone healthy? What's wrong? Why are you crying this way?" And finally, Rebbetzin Rotberg calms down. And she says, "My 6th grade son's Rebbe in Kitava, my son in Kitava, his Rebbe sent home a note this week that he didn't learn so well and he needs some chizuk in his learning. Could you believe it? My 6th grade son is not learning the way that he should be learning," and she begins to cry again. That's the prayer, and that's the tears of a mother. And those tears, none of them ever are in vain. That's what helped the Rotberg children become such Yireim and such Shleimim. Do you know that Rev Moshe Sternbuch was very close to the Tribuna Rav, the Koich of Miyakov, and he used to go to the Tribuna Rav often, and he would talk to him and learning. Rav Moshe Sternbuch was a goyin adir, an incredible Torah genius. People said that Rav Moshe Sternbuch knew Kol HaTorah Kula Be'al Peh, so much so they used to say about Rav Moshe Sternbuch that when he made a bracha, Birkas Chasanim, Birkas Eirson, underneath the chuppah, the way he knew it wasn't because he was by so many chuppahs, he knew it because it was a Gemara, and he knew Gan Shas Be'al Peh. One day Rav Moshe Sternbuch walks into the Tribuna Rav, and he sits down and he shares with him a profound, brilliant understanding in a Gemara. The Tribuna Rav was blown away. And all of a sudden he looks at Rav Moshe Sternbuch, he goes, "I want you to know something. That's not your own chiddush. That's not your own novel understanding." My Sternbuch says, "Rabbi, I didn't see it in any sefer." "It is." He says, "No, it's your mother's understanding." It's my mother, she doesn't learn Gemara. He says, "No, the chiddush is your mother's, because your mother cried b'hadlakas neiros, zakeni legadol banim ubnei banim. Yireyim Shleim Talmidei Chachamim Oyavei Hashem Anshe Emes Zera Kodesh. It was her tears, El Hanara Zeh Spalalti, that she davened for you, that helped you get to this incredible level of Havana and Torah, that you could come up with such a brilliant and such a profound understanding. That's the tears of a Yiddish mama. That's the heartfelt tefillas that a person cries, that a person says, that a person begs, pleads, and supplicates. Rav Elyashiv, Zechronu Livracha, was not a person that showed his emotion on his sleeves. Sadly, in his own lifetime, he lost his wife and 4 daughters. Yet throughout the Shiva and the Levaya, no one saw him cry. Perhaps he did in a quiet place, not in front of other people. The family only remembered one incident where they saw their father cry. What was that incident? What catastrophic event? There was a family in Yerushalayim that was close to the Elyashivs that had a son that was struggling in his Yiddishkeit. And he had hit a point where he was about to walk away. They brought him to Rabbi Elyashiv, and he sits down in front of Rabbi Elyashiv, and the father and the mother pour out their tears, and the boy sitting there stoically. And as Rabbi Elyashiv is looking at this beautiful neshama who's struggling so much, and considering chas v'shalom walking away because of all the problems and the issues, challenges and trauma, and whatever it was that brought him to that point, Rabbi Elyashiv couldn't anymore, and he began to cry. For the only time that his family ever saw Rabbi Elyashiv shed tears. On the spot, on the moment, the boy began to feel something inside of him. Something began to stir. And thus began a long but steady, healthy process of tshuva where the boy mamish came back and became a ben Torah. Those are the tears of a Gadol b'Yisrael. And that's the situation where a Gadol b'Yisrael ekes out a tear. Sadly in Klal Yisrael, and particularly in Eretz Yisrael, there's the Mesifta crisis. You have children who everyone's trying to get into the best Mesiftas, the best high schools. And some get in, they know the right people. Some get in because they have resources, but not everyone gets in. And there are children who are such special children, Erlicha children, who really should get into the top Mesiftas, but they don't get in because their family is not recognized. No one knows who they are, and sadly they have to choose a second-tier school, maybe even a Mesifta, a high school which is below what they're capable of. And there was one such family who had a child who was sweeter than sugar, more beautiful midas than you can imagine, Erlich, Yirei Shamayim, a great learner, a bright boy. And he took bechinas and all these Mesiftas, but there was nobody pushing on his behalf. His family was not from any type of yichus. There was no resources in the family. They were unknown. This was just a good, solid Erlich Yiddish family. And because of that, the boy didn't get into any of the top Mesiftas. He got into Mesifta that was definitely a bunch of tiers under his capability. And the family was distraught. The boy was distraught. He wanted to learn. He wanted to grow, and he wasn't being given the opportunity. In the family, it was Tisha B'Av day after day. A day before the Zman is supposed to start, the father and mother look at their child, and their heart is so broken for their child. What should they tell him? That the system failed him? How do you tell that to a child? And what's his future? Understanding and knowing that because he is not someone, whatever, that his own proficiency and his own amelis is not worth anything in this world. The father couldn't anymore, and he tells his wife, I can't see my son suffering this way, I have to do something. She goes, what are you going to do? He says, I'm going to Tveria. What are you going to do at Tveria? I'm going to Rameir Balhanes. There's Nisim. Miracles happen by Rameir Balhanes. I'm going to Rameir Balhanes. He travels all the way to Tveria. He comes to the cave of Rameir Balhanes. He sits down and he begins to cry from the depth of his heart. This is the child that he had such hopes and dreams and aspirations. And his dreams and his child's dreams are shared. Hashem, please help him get into the right type of Mesifta. And if you can't do that, whatever the reason is, Hashem, at least make him feel like the Mesifta he's going to can help him, and he shouldn't feel despondent and dejected and rejected. And he's sitting there and he's crying half an hour and a half. After 2 hours, he cried himself dry and he wipes his tears. He was totally oblivious to surroundings. He opens his eyes and he can't believe what he sees. Standing there, watching him crying, is the head of the top Mesifta that his son had applied to. He looks at the man almost in shock. The head of this Mesifta looks at him and says to him, Rabbi, I don't know who you are, but is everything okay? Is there a chayla? Is someone sick? Can I daven for them? What's going on? I'd love to help you. And he breaks down again and he says, no, everyone's healthy, and there's no chayla, and there's no parnasa issues. It's my son who is such a special boy, and he hasn't been able to get into any Mesifta that's really at his level. Listen, you're a Rosh Mesifta, maybe you could do something? The Rosh Mesifta was so moved. On the spot, he takes out his cell phone. He calls the administrator. He says, "We have another boy joining us." I know I said we wouldn't take anyone. We have to take this boy. And the boy gets in. How did he get in? His father too was a man of resources. His father too was a man of means. Tears. Tefillas. No tear, no tefillah is not listened to. Everything has value. And the Rebbeinu Shalom puts it where he has to put it.
Enjoyed this story? Come again. Bring a friend. StoriesToInspire.org